I got her. I've got her. Hey, Bobby.
Bring the camera in.
Hey, Bobby, come here. Come here. I've got you, Bobby.
What's your name?
You're alright.
What's your name? What's your name, sweetheart?
My name is Cleo.
Your name
You're
is
alright,
Cleo.
Bobby.
Hello, Cleo.
So it is hard for me to believe that it has been 8 months since this case happened. It feels to me like literally yesterday when the disappearance of 4-year-old Cleo Smith was splashed across media outlets all over the world, and we were all sitting and watching, waiting to hear the good news of her safe return. But as days turned into weeks, many of us feared and expected the worst, myself included. And I think that any avid true crime follower out there will already know that the first few minutes and hours that a child goes missing are the most critical. With every minute that passes, every second, the chances of a child returning home safely decreases significantly. And statistically speaking, when a child is taken, 76% are killed within 3 hours, and almost 90% are killed within the first 24. So it's unsurprising to me that Cleo's case drew comparisons to Madeleine McCann. The girls were both of a similar age and appearance, both away with their families, one camping, one on vacation, when they both seemingly disappeared into thin air. And then there's Australia's most well-known missing child's case, little William Tyrrell. He was just 3 years old when he went missing, presumed abducted, back in 2014. If you don't know the case I'm talking about, it is the little boy wearing the Spider-Man costume. And both he and Maddie have not been seen since the day they disappeared. So why am I telling you all of this? Well, to remind you just how remarkable the outcome of today's case truly is, because there are far too many missing children that do not get a happy ending, that don't come home. And in many cases, families are left with little to no answers as to what even happened. So today's case begins on Friday, October 15 of 2021, when 4-year-old Cleo Grace Smith, along with her mum, Ellie, stepdad Jake, and 7-month-old baby sister Isla were on a camping trip for the weekend at a place called the Quabba Blowholes Campground. And this trip is set to be their first family getaway together since Isla was born, and Cleo is incredibly excited. Ellie and Jake are especially excited, however, as the pair of them actually grew up going to this exact spot with their own families and are keen to carry on the tradition with their own children. And speaking of which, I am guessing 99.9% of you have not heard of the Quabba blowholes before this case, or even Carnarvon for that matter, which is where the family lived, by the way. So let me give you a little quick rundown. First off, Carnarvon is a small town with a population of about 5,000 people here in Western Australia, and it's about a 9-hour drive north of our major city, which is Perth. And I know firsthand just how painfully long the drive is from Perth, because I went there as a kid with my own parents, although I can't remember too much about Carnarvon besides the fact that it has tropical weather, it's famous for its banana plantations, and has a big dish there that actually assisted with the moon landing, which is actually kind of a cool fact. But anyway, that's enough of our history geography lesson. Let's keep it moving. And by the way, in Carnarvon, Ellie worked for a beauty salon and Jake worked for mining company Rio Tinto. So the Quabba Blowholes campground is located about 1 hour out of Carnarvon and is pretty much right on the beach. And this Blowholes campground is actually famous for its insane shows of water jets that shoot up like 30 meters from its blowholes below. It's a pretty crazy show. Never been there myself, but I looked up the photos and they looked pretty intense. So On night one, just before sunset, the family arrive at the campground, and Jake and Ellie quickly begin to set up their tent, which is a brand new 2-room tent that they bought especially for this first camping trip as a family of 4. So they set up their tent, they set up an awning, and they start to make dinner for the girls before finishing up their night roasting marshmallows by the fire. And at around 8 p.m., they tuck the girls into bed. Cleo's on a blow-up mattress and Isla is right next to her in her cot. And Cleo's tucked in wearing this pink and purple one-piece sleep suit, I guess, covered in blue, pink, yellow, orange kind of patterns of flowers and butterflies. And I think for those of us that followed the case, the image of this one piece suit is pretty much burnt into our brains. It was one of the images that was heavily used in the effort to find Cleo. So at around 1:30 a.m., Cleo wakes up and asks her mum for a glass of water. The 2 rooms in the tent are basically separated by this paper-thin divider, therefore Cleo can easily access her parents' room and vice versa. So Ellie gets up to get her daughter some water before they both head back to sleep. And then at around 6 a.m., Ellie wakes up and heads back into the girls' room to feed baby Isla. And this is when she notices that Cleo is missing. And not only that, her red and grey sleeping bag is also gone. She also sees that the tent zipper is partially open and later noted that the zipper on their side of the tent, Ellie and Jake's side, is about 30 or is open about 30 centimeters. And this is when Ellie shouts out to Jake, "Cleo is gone." Jake also takes note of the fact that there is no drag marks from Cleo's sleeping bag in the sand and no footprints. So if Cleo had wandered off on her own, surely there would be drag marks of her picking up her what is probably quite a heavy sleeping bag for a 4-year-old and dragging it through the sand, and of course her little footprints, but none of that was there. Immediately, Ellie and Jake grab Isla and they begin looking for Cleo. And as I said, they both grew up coming to this area, so they were pretty familiar with the places a child may hide. But after no luck, at 6:23 a.m., they phone the police. And 2 policemen are sent from Carnarvon, and more are sent shortly after, with the first 2 officers arriving to the blowholes at about 7:10 a.m. And it is not long before the search for Cleo Smith is a full blown operation. They close down and cordon off the Blowholes campsite, considering it a crime scene, and roadblocks are also put up that day to ensure that anybody leaving the general area is being searched. A land, air, and sea search also do begin this day, including the use of drones, horseback, SES volunteers, basically every resource available to them. Campgoers, Carnarvon locals, as well as friends and family, also head down to the blowholes to pitch in any way that they can. But unfortunately, Ellie and Jake are actually barred from taking part in the search, so all they can really do is sit back and wait. Although in the coming days, Ellie does use her social media platforms to get the word out about her missing daughter, despite the police actually recommending against her doing this, as she said later on that this felt like the only thing that she could really do to help. And of course, I cannot begin to imagine how painful it would be just to be sitting back, watching, waiting, and not being able to do anything. As the sun begins to set, panic spreads across the board, keeping in mind the stats I shared with you at the beginning of the video. Although at this stage, Cleo's disappearance is not considered an abduction. And in the days that followed, a task force of more than 100 police officers is formed to find Cleo, and her search would actually soon become the largest search operation that Western Australia had ever seen. Police also, of course, sat down to chat with Ellie and Jake, as well as Cleo's biological father, who lived in the small city of Mandurah, which is located just outside of Perth. Although I should add that none of them were considered suspects at this point, or at any point for that matter. On October 19, now 3 long days since Cleo went missing, Ellie and Jake made a public plea for their daughter's safe return. Ellie stated that she would never leave us. She would never leave the tent. She added that Cleo is lazy when it comes to walking and won't ride her bike very far. All she wants to do is go in the bottom of our pram, end quote. And at this stage in the investigation, it is still uncertain as to whether Cleo had been taken or if she had left on her own. From day one, her parents believed it was an abduction, but the police publicly stated, at least, that they were treating Cleo's case as a search and rescue. And as for public opinion, in those early days from memory, I believe it was quite split. And unfortunately, as it does often happen with similar cases, people did begin to point the finger at the parents. Even more unfortunate and unfair for that matter, because Jake was Cleo's stepfather, speculation began to circulate that maybe he was involved in her disappearance. But whatever the case, for a 4-year-old to be missing for 72 hours without an explanation was not good. The area in which Cleo went missing was also known for something called sleeper waves or king waves, which I hadn't actually heard of until this video. And these sleeper waves or king waves have actually had several fatalities occurring in recent years in this area as a result of people unexpectedly being swept off cliffs and rocks and into the ocean. And in fact, as you actually enter the Blowhole's campsite, a large wooden sign reads "King Waves Kill" as a strong warning to any visitors coming to the area. This thought added just one more terrifying possibility as to what may have happened to Cleo. Barren terrain surrounded the rest of the Blowholes area, and for the first few days at least, the weather was pretty good, so if Cleo was lost somewhere out there, she at least had a pretty good chance of surviving the days and the nights. That was until about Monday into Tuesday when strong winds and heavy rains began to hit the area and also slowed down the search efforts for Cleo. So over the next several days, as more information came to light, opinion did sway more towards the abduction theory. I mean, for one, her sleeping bag being missing didn't add up. Why would Cleo take it with her if she had just wandered off on some sort of adventure? And then the public learned that the place in which the tent's zipper had been opened was out of Cleo's reach, making it practically impossible that she wandered off on her own accord. So October 21 was now 5 days since Cleo disappeared, and the case was officially labelled an abduction case, with the WA government actually making a really swift announcement for a $1 million reward for any information leading to Cleo's whereabouts. And this money being put on offer was actually quite extraordinary, because besides, of course, the amount being a large amount, in many cases it can take years, if not decades, for a case to receive such a high reward offer from the government. Obviously, in this case, time was of the essence, so, and an extreme measure was deemed necessary. It's also worth noting that at the time Cleo went missing, the state of Western Australia was in a full lockdown because of course of the virus. Therefore, at the very least, we could assume that Cleo was very likely still in the state of Western Australia, not to mention her face had been plastered literally everywhere, so it's very unlikely she would have been able to get around unnoticed. So unsurprisingly, following this reward announcement, bounty hunters actually headed to the area to conduct their own searches, but by this point, police had pretty much searched the entire vicinity and had wrapped up their own search and announced that they were confident that Cleo was not in the Blowholes area or areas surrounding. And I feel like it maybe sounds like that this search was wrapped up quite quickly, but actually, hundreds of people were involved in covering every square inch of the area in question, even searching through literal tons of rubbish, 17 tons to be exact, collected from an area stretching about 600 k's or 372 miles up and down the WA coast. And for those of you that don't know or are not aware, by the way, Western Australia is actually bloody huge and vast. It has a lot of barren land, which of course doesn't exactly make searching for a missing person an easy task. I did actually recently read that Perth had overtaken Adelaide as the murder capital of Australia, and it's not hard to see why. We have so much darn space around here to hide out, or hide really anything. It is kind of the perfect place to commit a crime. In fact, this case was often referred to by the police as looking for a needle in a haystack. For context, if WA was a country, we would be the 10th largest in the world. We are actually 10 times bigger than the entirety of the UK, 3.5 times the size of Texas. So I guess you could say that everything is bigger in WA, not Texas. And we also make up 1/3 of this entire country, and our population density is just one person per square kilometre. That's about 2.5 people per square mile. Of course, most of our population does live here in Perth, but now you know why we are one of the most isolated cities in the world. I kind of get the feeling that a lot of people outside of Australia kind of think that Australia is a small country, but it is just our population that is small. Our landmass is ginormous. So if there was ever a bad state to go missing in the entire world, quite frankly, this is it. And now you understand the needle in the haystack reference. I do hope by adding this extra info, it does give you a little bit more context to the case and just how remarkable it is, or it was. I don't often, in fact, I don't think I have really ever, except maybe once or twice in the beginning, covered recent cases. But given the outcome and just how local this case was to me, I did really want to share this story on my channel and try to give it a more local perspective, I suppose. I know there is at least one other channel that has covered this case, but anyway, guess you're hearing it from me today. So we are now 1 week into Cleo's disappearance, and her parents have left the Blowholes campsite. Devastated, of course, and they have returned home to where they live in Carnarvon. Meanwhile, the police are diving headfirst into this investigation, and with quite literally the whole world watching them and precious time ticking, the pressure is on. So one of the main leads police actually focused on was a car that was seen and heard leaving the campsite at around 3 a.m. on the morning that Cleo disappeared. And keeping in mind just how isolated the Blowholes area is, so seeing a car leaving the campsite at 3 a.m. on a Saturday morning was kind of bloody strange. Plus, there was only really one road in and out of this campsite, so if Cleo was taken by a car, it's likely that this was the one that she was taken in. On October 25, day 9 of Cleo being missing, police made a public plea for any information on this vehicle. And the investigation also did look into local registered sex offenders in the area and did also interview those that were staying at the campground on the night in question, although it was quite challenging to track down all of these campers, as you don't actually have to hand over any type of information or ID to stay on this campsite. Eventually, police did manage to track down about 100 people that were staying there that night and collected their DNA swabs as well as statements to help investigators just form a better picture of the night that Cleo went missing. Somewhat interesting was that not one camper actually recalled seeing Cleo at the campsite, but that could be because of how late her family did arrive there and the fact the sun was setting. Plus, I'm sure all the other families were preoccupied with their own camping adventures. I should also add here that technological evidence apparently did confirm that she indeed was at the campsite, even if nobody saw her there, and I do again want to stress that her parents were not suspects. But speaking of which, during the investigation, no suspects were actually ever publicly named. So, other bits and pieces of evidence that police did look at was phone data, GPS, CCTV, satellite imagery. Although you can imagine that given how remote this area was, there wasn't exactly much of any of this to go by. I mean, there wasn't exactly CCTV in, like on an isolated campsite in the middle of nowhere. The investigation did also manage to extract DNA from the crime scene itself and found footprints both inside and outside of the tent. Police did also look into several theories pertaining to the abduction over the course of their investigation, like whether the family had been stalked. However, it was actually theorized in the end that this had been a crime of opportunity. It turned out that Cleo's little bike had actually been sitting outside of their tent, indicating to any people going by that there was a little girl staying in that tent. And as I stated earlier, Ellie and Jake's side of the tent had been partially unzipped, so whoever took Cleo likely checked their side, saw that there was two sleeping adults, so went around to the other side of the tent, saw that Cleo was there, and then likely scooped her up in her sleeping bag and very swiftly and quickly took her. I should also add that the night that Cleo went missing was a rather loud and windy one, which may explain why nobody heard the abduction. I did also want to briefly touch on how the public reacted to this case at the time. So, the local reaction that I personally saw to the disappearance was pretty intense. There was posters, signs, bumper stickers, advertisement boards, those sort of light up ones that you see like in shopping centres or on bus stops. This was on top of course, how much the media was discussing Cleo's case, and all of this was, of course, incredible to see. And in my lifetime, I've only really seen a similar reaction to one other case. And I'm about to age myself here, but that is the Sarah Spears case. And Sarah disappeared in January of 1996. Yes, I am old. And I remember her missing posters being everywhere. I also recall her disappearance being all anybody could even talk about at the time. Sarah was just 18 and thought to be a victim of the Claremont serial killer, but to this day, she is still considered a missing person. I have actually been thinking of doing an entire video dedicated to Sarah. And I do have a series on my channel all about the Claremont case and the Claremont serial killer, but as Sarah is still a missing person, and Bradley Edwards, the Claremont killer, was never charged with her murder, she is technically still a standalone missing person case. And at this point, I don't think it is fair that her disappearance just gets clumped in with the entire Claremont saga, but let me know if you'd like to see an in-depth video on her case. I have recently been reading a book that goes a little more in-depth about it, so I'd be really keen to cover it if you'd be keen to hear about it. Anyway, as I was saying, from what I was reading, the entire town of Carnarvon really did rally behind Ellie and Jake and try to support and assist them in any way that they could. Outside of WA, as I mentioned, this case was making international headlines, which is kind of crazy considering it all originated from this small, tiny, isolated part of what I would consider a pretty little known part of the world. Unfortunately, the case didn't exactly receive entirely positive press. Feelings at times were rather reminiscent of the Azaria Chamberlain case. And I won't reiterate that entire case for you now, but if you're not familiar, then A Dingo's Got My Baby may ring a bell to you. But if you do know the story, then you'll understand the similarities. I did actually cover the Azaria case way back when on my channel. If you are interested, you can look it up. Basically, the similarities were, of course, Lindy Chamberlain was blamed and they were on a camping trip, and of course, the parents in this case were blamed. They were on a camping trip. I'm not going to go into it. But anyway, then there was, of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, the comparisons drawn between the Maddie McCann case and Cleo's. Both young girls, both on holidays, and both disappeared without a trace. Maddie, however, has not been seen in 15 years. And actually, when I was covering this case and sort of seeing what was happening with the Madeleine McCann case, I was shocked to learn that it had been 15 years since that case happened. Truly, I'm shocked. I can't. Whew, time goes too fast. So now it is November 2, a Tuesday, and it is day 18 of the search for Cleo Smith. And this is actually the day that the investigation had its first massive breakthrough. More information actually came to light on the suspect vehicle I mentioned earlier, including some CCTV footage of a sedan driving down the North West Coast Highway on the morning Cleo disappeared. They also tracked down a phone that was pinging from a tower near the Blowhole's campsite on the morning of the abduction. And all of this information led police to 36-year-old Terrence Darrell Kelly, a name that had never even been on the investigation's radar until this very day. So armed with this newfound information, that same day, police tracked Kelly down, pulled him over after spotting him in his vehicle, and arrested him on the spot. But I don't exactly know what happened, but he was taken to hospital sometime between his arrest and being taken into custody for self-inflicted injuries. Following the arrest, police obtained a search warrant of his home, and as police cautiously approached his house later that evening, they really had no clue what to expect. I'm sure they were hoping for the best, but likely expecting the worst. At 12:46 a.m. on Wednesday, November 3, 4 detectives broke into Terrence Kelly's home, and it was not long before they came across a bedroom with a locked door. They broke through it, and in that bedroom, sitting alone and playing with toy cars, much to the relief and surprise of the detectives, was little Cleo Smith, alive and seemingly unharmed. And the first question that they asked this scared little girl was her name. They asked several times, "What's your name? What's your name, sweetheart?" Stuttering momentarily, she responded, "My name is Cleo."
I got it. I've got it. Hey, Bobby.
Bring the camera in.
Hey, Bobby, come here. Come here. I've got you, Bobby.
What's your name?
You're alright.
What's your name? What's your name, sweetheart?
My name is Cleo.
Your name
You're
is
alright,
Cleo.
Bobby.
Hello, Cleo.
A line that would be heard and followed with tears and sighs of relief across the globe. And I literally don't think there was one person out there that did not at least tear up, just a little bit, at the news that Cleo was found safe and well, including the detectives involved in her case, whom openly admitted to weeping with relief at the news, many calling it the best moment of their careers. Unbelievably, Cleo was found in a house in Carnarvon, located just minutes from her own home. And of course, as soon as she was found, the police contacted Ellie and Jake, telling them on the phone, "We have somebody that wants to speak with you." As it turned out, Ellie and Jake actually didn't have any clue as to what had been going on that day. The arrest, the search warrant, they didn't know a thing. They only found out the good news after Cleo was found in the home safe and well. Shortly after, Cleo was taken to Carnarvon Hospital and her parents soon rushed there to meet her. And all things considered, Cleo was actually said to be in really good spirits, with one police officer describing her as a little Energizer bunny. In fact, the first photo that was released to the media after the news that Cleo was found hit the headlines was a photo, and I think many of us will remember this very famous photo, a photo of little Cleo sitting up in her hospital bed, smiling and waving, holding onto her icy pole. And of course, news of Cleo's rescue made headlines all over the world, including the US, the UK, New Zealand, even parts of Europe. And one criminologist even described the outcome of this case as a once in a lifetime miracle. This abduction case quite literally broke all the rules of a child abduction case up until this point, but of course, in the best way possible. So early in this investigation, her mother, Ellie, spoke of how Cleo was born 8 weeks premature and had been a fighter from day one. And that quote just has stuck with me because, oh my God, was she correct? Cleo is, she's a hell of a fighter. She really is. My God, I think most grown adults wouldn't have coped going through what she did. Anyway, meanwhile, across Perth, as news of Cleo's rescue spread, people were celebrating. And quite frankly, at the time, I think we as a society were in need of some good news, a feel good story. This outcome was the outcome that we all needed and wanted to hear, but I don't think any of us expected. Across the city, there was actually light displays in Cleo's honour, including the entire council house building being lit up in a bright blue as a tribute to the WA police. And there was also road signs reading, "Welcome home, Cleo." And of course, individuals even got in on the action, celebrating by giving coffee shops hundreds of dollars to put towards free coffees for patrons that day. And back in Carnarvon, the streets were also filled with balloons and signs reading "Welcome home, Cleo." There was even people going into local bottle shops wanting to buy like cartons of beer for the police. So just a really incredible outcome and reaction all around. I feel like I'm getting emotional thinking about it again. Oh my God. I like don't really I think the last video I got emotional in was the Jessie Kate one. Ugh. Ugh. I think we all feel the same thinking about this case, right? It's a little girl. She's 4. Oh, oh my God, I need to wrap this video up, but I'm not done yet. But anyway, as I said at the beginning, finding a child safe and well after so long is a rarity. So when it does happen, it is a reason to celebrate. Very unfortunately, however, in the early stages of her rescue being reported, the wrong man was publicly named. Seven West Media incorrectly named a local Carnarvon man, and even worse, attached 2 images of this man, leading to this individual receiving a lot of online harassment, as you can imagine. And in fact, this entire ordeal put so much stress on this man, whom I'm choosing not to rename, that he had a panic attack at the police station and needed to be hospitalized. Of course, as I said, he turned out to be completely innocent, and last I heard, there was a defamation case in the works, and rightly so. That is just such a fuck up. I don't know a better word, honestly, for a major news outlet, major media outlet. Disgraceful. Really, it was. So, let's briefly touch on the absolute scum that committed this crime. Terence Kelly's neighbours described him as someone that was quiet, kept to himself. One even described him as an oddball, and a neighbour would later come forward saying that he did actually spot Kelly buying some nappies during the time that Cleo was missing, but unfortunately he never put 2 and 2 together. Kelly did live alone and didn't have any children, and had somewhat of a strange obsession with toy cars, Disney princess dolls, and his favourite, Bratz dolls or anything relating to Bratz. He was even known to visit his local toy store to buy dolls for his daughter, despite her not existing. And in his home, and I will insert some photos of this, and if you are just listening, it's definitely worth having a peek at these photos. Kelly had an entire room dedicated to his massive toy collection. No doubt a dream for any child, but for a 36-year-old childless man, well, look, it's unusual to say the least. I'm not gonna hate on adults that collect toys, but anyway. don't want to get myself in trouble here. So after taking Cleo, it's no surprise that the media began referring to Kelly as the human doll collector, with many speculating that he took Cleo because he wanted his own real life doll to play with and dress up, which is sick. This theory is backed up as well by the fact that he actually cut Cleo's hair, and according to Cleo, did try to unsuccessfully dye it pink. And I can genuinely not begin to imagine, nor do I want to begin to imagine, what would be running through this poor 4-year-old girl's head being taken into this man's home. And to add to his bizarre and disturbing behavior, Kelly also had several online profiles where he would pose as a doting father that was highly concerned with child safety in the community. And it should be noted that Kelly also had no connection whatsoever to Cleo or her family, although he did follow Ellie on social media and liked some of her posts regarding Cleo being missing, which is sick and disturbing. He was, however, known to police but never was a suspect during the investigation or even up until the day of his arrest, nor was he on any sex offender registers. And since his arrest, he has been transported to a prison here in Perth and has pled guilty to child stealing, although we've never really heard any actual reason as to why he did what he did. Not from him, anyway. Cleo, of course, has been spoken to since her rescue, and what we have learned from her was that Kelly told her that her baby sister was sick and that her parents needed some time alone to nurse her back to health. And by the way, that $1 million reward was never claimed. I often wonder how often these $1 million awards or $100,000 awards are actually claimed, because I never really hear of people saying, "Hey, I solved this case and I got the $1 million award." Like, I've never heard of that happening. But anyway, getting off track. In a 60 Minutes interview, when asked how Cleo was doing, Ellie said that she was okay. She's, quote, happy, she's bubbly, she's sad, she's angry, but she's getting there, end quote. Cleo, Isla, Ellie and Jake have since left Carnarvon and are travelling around Australia living up the van life. I hope they are living it up, and I hope they are having an amazing time, although they have vowed to never return to the Blowholes campsite, understandably. And of course, I hope and pray that Cleo is doing well, and I'm sure she is being looked after and loved and getting all the support that she needs and deserves. And if there are any updates, I'll let you know. That's all for today. Thank you for being here, and until next time, stay vigilant and stay safe.